TSN's Motoring 94 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.
This week, Motoring 94 has traveled out to the Atlantic provinces. Now, if you're already making your vacation plans for the summer of '94, may I recommend you put the Maritimes at the top of the list. This is home to everything you would possibly want in a vacation. Great beaches, great seafood, and maybe some of the most hospitable and friendly people you will find anywhere. But the East Coast is also home to a racing series known as MASCAR. It's very popular out here, but there are those who feel it does not get the respect it deserves on a national basis. We begin our story in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
How you doing? Good morning, Halifax, Dartmouth. Ken Packham on your radio, and Denise and Clive. In fact, the entire morning team are going to be with us as we get you off, rolling down the road, get to work on time to school or whatever you got planned for today. Hey, lots of sunshine and more of today's great country music on Country 101.
Ken Packham has been in front of a microphone for as long as he can remember. The last 15 years has seen him at Country 101 in Halifax.
Hit the tall timbers, I guess, and we'll say hi to the princess. You have a good day, sweetie.
Ken loves radio and country music, but his roots are at the racetrack. This is Petty Raceway, just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. It's one of the stops for the Maritime Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, better known as MASCAR. It was 9 years ago that Ken Packham and some friends founded what has become the premier racing series in Atlantic Canada.
NASCAR has a tremendous following of people. It's like a wagon train almost. If you look around here, you'll see an incredible number of motorhomes. Some of these started pulling in here Friday night, and they come from northern New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, the southern tip of Nova Scotia. They're all over Atlantic Canada, and they have one thing in common. And these people come from all demographics, all income levels, but the one thing they share is a real love for the MASCAR Tour. And it has grown now from 11 teams to, we have 46 teams registered with us now. At one time, it could have been used or seen as a training ground because somebody would, a few years ago would say, great, it's a great place to graduate to the ACT Tour from, etc. We don't graduate to the ACT Tour from this group anymore. We go out with the ACT Tour and we run with them. Our guys, even to change their cars around to meet their rules, are out there and they're competitive. And really, when the American-Canadian Tour came to Atlantic Canada this year, if the MASCAR guys hadn't been involved, they probably would have been really hard-pressed to put a show together. So the caliber of the cars, definitely on the upswing. The number of teams on the upswing, the quality of the show. Really, if you go right across the country, I'd compare it with anybody.
I was one of the first ones that helped start it. We started with about 6 cars about 10 years ago. And now we're up to 40 cars and 16 races a week. They come from Cape Breton. We have one fella from Newfoundland flies over each race and back. St. John, New Brunswick, Cape Breton. They come from all the Maritimes. And they're real good followers. They're here every week.
The cars basically are a tube chassis car, okay? We keep them to a 2-barrel carburetor, and they use a DOT-approved street-treaded tire to try and retain some cost control over what it costs to build these things. They're still not cheap to build. There's people out here racing that can come to race in a $10,000, $15,000 car, and they'll chase somebody that's running a $40,000, $50,000 car. By the time you get support equipment, tools, everybody hauls them in a box these days with a bedroom on the front of it, so you're going to spend $100,000, $150,000 to get into a good first-rate team, and that's where the top runners are.
Despite the success of MASCAR, Ken Packham believes the Canadian racing scene lacks a common goal.
The reason NASCAR is so successful south of the border, for crying out loud, is this: it takes in, they run from California right through to Dover, Delaware, you know that. And that's something that we have to overcome is this regional segmentation, as it were, for lack of a better word. Once we can overcome that boundary and get a more common rule, even if we can retain our own individual identities, we can still run some common events, and I think that's really going to help.
it's very competitive. It's more competitive this year than it's ever been. And, you know, like when the boys come down from ACT and stuff, these boys all run with them. So we're fairly fast.
Is it money? Is it pride? What's on the line out there?
It's pride. You know, the money, we really can't afford to do what we do, but we enjoy doing it. So with the help of our sponsors and other people like that, it really helps out, and we can afford to play like this.
Just like to mention a few of the sponsors that help.
Wish me luck, will you?
All this great racing. Gentlemen of the Chevy Lumina, the Atlantic Chevy Lumina, next hand for St. John's Dogs.
This is my third year. I race limited schedule on the American Canadian Tour and 100% on the MASCAR Tour. I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland, and I fly over every Friday. I race every weekend in a different city every weekend.
You must love this series, then.
Well, you know, it's like good and bad. Hey, when it's good, it's great. When it's bad, like it's awful. Racing for me has been my whole life. My son here, he started in it last year. He won Rookie of the Year. We've got upwards to something like 48 cars registered. You know, it's been my life, and I love it. And to see you here tells me one thing, that I think more Canadians are going to see it.
I think really anybody that looks at this type of a thing, you have to realize that it hasn't been a sport in 10 years. This is entertainment. The person that buys the ticket at your gate is spending money that they would use to go to a nightclub, rent videos and stay home and pop popcorn, whatever. That's the money that you have to access to stay alive. So if you're not a really entertaining medium, you're not going to make a cut.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we look at the 1994 Nissan Access. Now, this vehicle is one of our long-term testers, and so we'll give you some of the early numbers at the end of this test drive. Power for the Access is provided by a large 2.4-litre fuel-injected 4 that produces 138 horses and 148 pounds-feet of torque. On the skid pad, these figures equated to 0 to 100k times in the 10-second range. Hardly what one would call quick, but given the fact that this is a small van, they're not out of line. Matched with this engine is a 4-speed automatic that comes complete with an on-off button for the overdrive. This little button comes in very handy in hilly terrain. It also helps matters around town. Out on the highway, the overdrive keeps the engine noise down and fuel economy up. Now that's not a bad combination. Out on the highway, the suspension and power-assisted rack and pinion steering keep the Access on track, and despite the large side area, the van is not overly susceptible to side winds. Ride and handling are looked after by an independent transverse link up front and parallel link in back. There are sway bars at both ends. One of the knocks against the Access in the past has been the amount of body roll that the driver feels during hard cornering. The key word there is feels, because the amount of body roll is actually more perceived than it is actual. During the pylon test, this Access has handled it rather well, and for a minivan there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. The brake system is of the ventilated front disc rear drum variety. During the brake test, we required just over 118 feet to stop from 80k. All stops were straight, and even after repeated tries, there was no evidence of brake fade. The credit here going to the ventilated discs. Inside, the Access is well finished and appointed. Our tester comes with power windows and locks, a power moonroof, as well as cruise control. The dash is highly legible, being similar to the one found in the Maxima. The black on white format is very easy on the eyes. High in the center console are the climate controls. They're of the slide variety, meaning they're easy to use. The radio cassette player offers wonderful sound, but because of its location is awkward to reach. Switching the position of the radio and heater would work wonders. Beneath the radio are some neat looking coffee cup holders.
The seats in all positions are comfortable. Up front, the nice contours and center armrests add to the overall comfort of the ride. The big story with the Access though is the level of versatility. It offers seating for 5 with reasonable trunk space. Fold down either side of the 60-40 split and you can now accommodate larger items like skis. Fold down the other half and you now have a very usable 69 cubic feet of storage space. The nice part about this setup is that when folded, the seats form a nice flat solid floor. The other nice thing is the privacy cover that keeps prying eyes off your valuables. In some respects the Access is lagging behind because there are no airbags and no anti-lock brakes. However, there is one neat safety device that stops a potential disaster. During the refueling process, somebody could try and open the left rear door. A special lockout prevents the door from opening more than an inch or so, and a loud buzzer sounds alerting you to the fact that somebody has opened the door. That is a very welcome touch. Well, that's it for this week's test drive. When viewed as a very roomy and versatile wagon rather than a small minivan, the Access has got attributes to spare. Now, as promised, let's go to the tail of the tape and the early numbers. The subject to this update is the cost of operation for the first 24,000 kilometers. As with the Elantra, Nissan suggests that routine maintenance be conducted every 12,000 kilometers. I fail to understand this recommendation. If you want to get the maximum life out of your car, the oil and filter must be changed every 6,000 k. In doing the extra oil changes, even at a Nissan dealership, the extra cost is about $142. Compare that to the cost of replacing an engine, and I think you begin to see the rationale behind the extra oil changes. Anyway, conducting the maintenance Nissan's way will set you back $175. So far into the test, we've put just over 3,000 kilometers on the Access. To date, we've been averaging 9.6 litres per 100 kilometers or 29.4 miles per gallon. This figure surpasses our expectation considerably, primarily because the majority of the distance has been done with the van loaded. Based upon these figures, the total cost of operating the Nissan Access over the first 24,000 kilometers is 6.49 cents per kilometer. We had planned to update this Jetta, however, because of the hacking and bashing that this car was subjected to at the AJAC Car of the Year testing program, we had to have the transmission replaced. As a result, we don't have very much mileage and so not much to report. We will, however, have more updates on this Jetta and the other cars in our long-term test fleet at a later date.
Well, the fans are getting a close-hand look here at the vehicles as they prepare for the MASCAR Bud 100 here at the Petty Raceway just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. But it's now time to head to the garage and join a man who makes his living at looking very closely at vehicles. That, of course, is our resident mechanic, Bill Gardner.
Brad, the part that I want to have a close look at today is the ball joints on a typical car. Now, whether it's a stock car like you're looking at the track, or a family car like this wreck, or a sports car, whatever, one thing that it does have in common is the ball joints. Now, this old car was scheduled to go to the crusher, but we found out that with all the bodywork removed, that it afforded us a pretty good look at what we want to look at today, and that's the ball joints. Now, if the bodywork was still here, you'd have a hard time seeing what we're looking at right here. Now, right here, I've got the upper ball joint. That's the upper ball joint assembly right there. And down here is what we refer to as the lower ball joint. Now, not all cars have two ball joints on each side. Many front-wheel drive cars have just a lower ball joint, and they use a different type of suspension. We call a McPherson strut type suspension. But on this one, we've got an upper and lower joint, and I've got a couple of new ones here so that you can see a little bit better what they look like, and I can show you the action that takes place. Now, as the steering has to turn and swivel in order to steer the car, the ball joint stud, that's this part here, has to be able to rotate. So the action that would take place at the ball joint when you're just plain steering the car would be something like this. The ball joint stud is just rotating. But as the car goes down the road, of course, and starts moving and encounters bumps, these control arms right here have to be able to move up and down and travel. That's our suspension travel. And when that takes place, the ball stud in the joint has to be able to do an action something like this, as well as quite possibly at the same time rotating. and you can see that the ball joint is capable of making all those moves. Now, if we look at the lower ball joint on this same car, it's very similar, although this particular one is called a load-carrying ball joint, and it's a press fit into the control arm. This tapered area here is where it would press right into the control arm. The stud is the same fashion, taper as well, threaded and drilled for our cotter pin. Now, a maintenance item for just about all ball joints that's quite often overlooked is lubricating them. Now, this particular car has grease fittings in its ball joints. There's about a 50-50 split today, though, with cars that don't have any grease fittings at all. Many of the light-duty cars, European and Japanese cars, in many cases don't have any grease fittings. But if you have a car like this one with greasable joints, or just about any light truck or 4x4, you're going to find some grease fittings in there, and it's important that they get regular maintenance. It's that new supply of grease that keeps the joint lubricated, of course, and in many cases flushes out dirt and water. But you don't want to overdo it because in many cases the joint is close to the brakes. It's got to be wiped away, any excess grease. Make sure that that's done at regular intervals, and that'll prolong the life of those important ball joints. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 94.
Carnations and black ties were the order of the night as the Canadian Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, better known as CASCAR, celebrated the end of the season. This was the annual awards banquet as drivers and crews honored the best of '93.
You know, they're all racers. They're people that you see at the racetrack throughout the summertime and come from all walks of life. There's business people here, there's teachers here. Everybody that loves motorsport is here, and of course everybody that's involved in CASCAR is here. A lot of our corporate sponsors are here tonight to enjoy the award ceremonies.
The big winner of the night was Kerry Mix, who was crowned National Driving Champion.
We've been racing for 9 years now, and it's an unbelievable feeling to win the Budweiser Super Series. And you know, the race, we were into the 14th race this year before we've ever won a Budweiser Super Series race, and that's after 4 years of just trying in CASCAR. So to win everything that we've won this year with you know, the new Ford Dually and everything, it's just an unbelievable feeling for Susan and I and the whole team.
Despite his success, Kerry Mix found himself without a major sponsor for the 1994 season. But Midas Canada quickly solved that problem.
CASCAR is, in our opinion, one of the most professional series that we've got going in the country right now. And when Kerry Mix became available for 1994, it was very easy to move ahead in terms of getting the national champion. So we're excited for him and for us too.
Well, our program will in '94 go right from coast to coast. British Columbia, which is Prince George, and right through to Halifax, although those details are not totally ironed out yet, but the Moosehead Grand Prix organizers have invited us to Halifax, and we're certainly anxious to work out a program that is going to take us to Halifax this year. So right coast to coast, approximately 20 races in our series. Of course, 8 of those to 10 being out west and 10 to 12 being in the east.
A big celebration is planned for Spring Hill, Tennessee. And if you own a Saturn, you're invited. General Motors' Saturn subsidiary will invite all 700,000 of its car owners to a homecoming festival at the factory in June. Saturn has been a huge success since day one. Billed as Saturn stock after the famous Woodstock rock concert, guests will get a plant tour, entertainment, and a barbecue.
This week's Midas tip concerns a winter driving problem I'm sure you've all encountered at one time or another, and that's a car with an excessively high fast idle speed or one that just refuses to kick down after it's warmed up. Now, all cars, whether they're carbureted or fuel injected, are designed to have some sort of a fast idle for the first several minutes of engine operation. And in many cases, it's as simple as just waiting for that engine to warm up enough to throttle back down. But if you've got a problem with the car where it's excessively high in the fast idle speed or it just won't kick down, That's going to be a real bad situation when you get on snow or ice. You may find that when you put the car in gear, if it's an automatic, it just spins sideways into the car parked beside you. Or when you're trying to negotiate stop and go traffic, your brakes just won't overcome that engine that's running at maybe 15 or 1800 RPM. A normal idle speed's around 700 RPM. So make sure that that car throttles back. In the case of a carbureted car, it may be a simple matter of just cleaning the carb, fast idle, linkage, and cam with some carb cleaner, maybe a minor adjustment with a screwdriver in many cases. We thought that this problem had disappeared with fuel injection, but we find that even fuel-injected cars can have this problem if they've got a hose leak or a vacuum leak around a gasket. Even a sticking throttle linkage on these type of cars can cause that situation. But in any case, if you've been living with that situation, get it fixed before you get into problems on snow or ice. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
Car racing in Canada is in deep trouble. Oh sure, the Molson Indy races do well, but at the supporting level, we've had 5 major series cancelled in the last couple of years, and it's all because sponsors have pulled out. Now, race fans complain that the Paul Tracys and Scott Goodyears of the future have no place to develop their skills. But hey, that's not the sponsors' problem. Their objective is to sell product. Now, racing remains a great marketing opportunity in Japan, Europe, and even the United States. Are Canadian companies too unimaginative to take advantage of the glamour and excitement that racing offers? Well, maybe they are. First of all, it requires a long-term commitment. Now, Honda and Michelin had a deal going with the Honda Civic Series, and that served them very well for 15 years. But still, the biggest problem remains with the racers themselves. There's just not enough talent in this country to support the dozens of different racing series we've got. You've got Formula 4 and F1600 and F2000. You've got showroom stock and production sports. We've seen both MASCAR and CASCAR in the show today. There's another completely non-compatible form of late model stock car called ACT. Now, just imagine, if we could get the top stars of all of these series to agree on a single type of race car that could be running on ovals on Friday night and Mosport on Sunday afternoon, then you'd be able to develop a series with a lot of great talent. It will be a great show for the fans across Canada, and let's remember, racing's not a sport, it's an entertainment. Once you had a good series like that, the fans would show up, and the opportunities for the sponsorships would be many-fold. But the problem is, racers agreeing on anything, it's impossible. You might as well try and solve a simple problem like forming a government in Lebanon. Oh, by the way, you might be wondering about this little car. Now, in addition to my professional series, I'm looking at a showroom stock series for Subaru 360s. This is a 1970 model. Malcolm Bricklin sold this car. Now, can you imagine 50 of these little babies on a racetrack at the same time? That'd be something worth paying for. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, the MASCAR 100 is over here at the Petty Raceway just outside of Moncton, New Brunswick. Cy Edwards from Elmsdale, Nova Scotia, the winner. 2 more races to wind up the season out here in the Atlantic provinces. And as we go to the credits in this program, we'll show you the final standings for the 1993 season. So that's it for this trip to the Maritimes. So now you've discovered that along with great seafood and great beaches out here in the Maritimes, we've also got some good racing. Try it the next time you're here. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 94 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.